Cameron in Pennsylvania.
Hey, how you doing?
Hey.
Doing all right.
Hey, good to hear. So my question, it actually kind of goes with the last caller, I guess you could say. How would you answer a person who is a theist who would say that they know that God exists? So in other words, they don't just believe that God exists, they actually claim to know that God exists.
What would you say?
I started asking how they were able to come to that conclusion and listen to what they have to say. And with the few conversations I have that have kind of started in that vein of where, I know God is real and because X, Y, Z. And a lot of times when that occurs, I end up kind of coming back to say, well, you said you know it because of X, Y, Z, but this other person has a different belief system and they believe it for X, Y, Z. Now, how am I supposed to differentiate who's correct and who's not? Like, what method can I use to determine who's correct in that aspect? Y'all both believe just the same. You're both just as strong believers. So how am I supposed to decide what method can I use?
Right. I mean, you can say, I understand that you are very confident in this belief, but your confidence alone doesn't convince me. So what is it that convinced you?
So I've actually had some experience in that, and I've pressed that line of logic, and I've also gone in the route of, you're so confident in this. If you look at other religions around the globe, Islam, Hinduism, you can clearly see that people are as just as confident as you, right?
Mm-hmm.
I feel as though when I push that, it doesn't help my case, in that it just it more pushes people into their camp of, I guess the people I'm talking to would be in Christians, and it would push them more into their camp of, I guess you could say the most general response I get is, they have their religions, but we have Jesus Christ, and he is obviously more pure than these other religions. And I've kind of had a tough time getting past that, because I know that's, pardon my French, it's kind of bullshit, but I can't figure a good way to respond to it.
It depends on where the conversation is coming from, because I mean, you may see it as not that productive that they're sort of hunkering down into the defense of their personal religion and saying, oh, well, we have Jesus. But you'd be surprised at how far you can get just by saying, basically, well, Jesus isn't that convincing to me. I've said this a few times on the show already just today, but if somebody is if somebody cares about convincing you, you should make them work for it. If they don't care about convincing you, then you may not necessarily have anything to talk about, because you could arrive at a point where they're like, well, I'm really sure that Jesus exists and loves me, and you go back at them saying, well, I'm not sure of that, and I don't see any reason to believe that, and they say, well, it's just true, and you say, okay, so how about The Walking Dead?
Yeah,
because
for sure.
you can recognize sometimes that conversations aren't going anywhere, and sometimes it's a win just not to give up ground and get frustrated. But it depends, because if they're really trying to convince you, then you should make it clear that they have to do some work to get you there. And just repeating, oh yeah, well, Jesus is true, doesn't cut it for an atheist.
Mm. And another thing I would say is, if they're giving that line of I would say line of attack, but that type of reasoning to you, then another question to pose is, well, if I have this religion and I give the same thing that you just told me about the religion that I believe, how likely is that to convince you that my religion is true and not yours? Like, how convincing would that actually be? Basically trying to let them kind of self-reflect on the evidence that they presented you with and how convincing it really is if it came from another party going towards them, you know?
Yeah. And if you want to shake a theist out of their certainty and this sort of going round and round about yes it is, no it isn't kind of thing, you could always be a little flippant, which I do sometimes, and say something completely off the wall and just match their certainty with equal certainty. Like, well, you know what? I talked to God last week and he told me he doesn't exist. I mean, you know, they're making this claim based on nothing, and so it's not unreasonable for you to mirror back what that sounds like to you.
Right. I do understand what you're saying in that respect, but if I can play devil's advocate on that, wouldn't me playing that card also more or less come off as arrogant?
Well,
you know, that,
sure, but what's more arrogant than and believe me, I've been accused of being arrogant. I'm well aware that this is a problem, but but they're the person that wants to be taken seriously by you. And sometimes it doesn't hurt to telegraph the fact that you don't take them or their position seriously, because at least if they are stuck saying the same things over and over again, it can get the message across that they're going to have to try something else. And that'll stop them from wasting your time.
Yeah, I understand what they're saying, that would make them perhaps reconsider their position.
Yeah, and anyway, they're arrogant. Why do you care if they think you're arrogant?
Yeah, it's a fair point. You got me on that one.
But it depends. It depends on what kind of working conversational relationship you want to have with this person. It depends on what kind of outcome you think you can reasonably get out of them. Mm-hmm. And nobody can just tell you this is the right thing to say. You kind of have to judge the conversation for yourself.
Yeah, and if I can, I am talking about my parents, actually. Yeah, I'm 21 years old in college, and I was raised as a Lutheran. So I've been an atheist since probably 18. I went to like a Christian college, and I recognized even probably before I went there that it was incorrect and that they weren't actually teaching real education. But I've been, as my call probably suggests, I've been struggling to tell them what I think and why I think they're wrong, and that has been kind of a struggle. But I think you're right in that maybe portraying the same level as a confidence in their proposals would help in that regard.
Yeah, now bear in mind, if you're having these conversations with your parents, my advice might be a little different, which is you might want to consider whether this conversation is not only productive in the sense of people convincing each other, but productive in terms of what kind of relationship you want to keep having with your parents. Because if this comes down to people yelling at each other, sometimes just remaining civil and making some topics off limits is better than trying to win the argument. And I would say that twice as much if this was somebody you were married to. That's just good marriage counseling in general.
Yes, I think if there's one thing I've learned from the whole situation, it's that if I do get married, it would be to someone who more or less shares my beliefs with me.
That's not a bad plan.
Yes, that's what I think.
Yeah, but we are kind of out of time and should wrap up. So you want to say something quick, or Phil, you want to throw something out there?
No, just like Russell said, that's it's a lot to consider since it's your parents. That's the relationship that you have with them. Also there's education. Funds if it's a relationship on that part. Like how important is it to you to stress that? Because you said that you were trying to explain yourself, I guess your atheism to your parents, and I guess defend it or challenge theirs. But do you feel that you have to do so? Or is that something that you started, or that conversation? I guess this is you dragging out the call a little bit longer, but I was just curious how why you felt that you had to necessarily explain yourself to your parents or have this conversation.
So essentially, I would say that the conversation more or less started around. I guess I would say it coalesced more around
I think we're going off in another direction, and we do have to wrap up.
I think you're right. No, I know you guys are over time. I don't mean to take up more time than I need to.
Sorry about that. Yeah,
I think you answered my question more than.
Well, good luck to you.
Thank you.
And thanks for calling.
All right, Gabriel.
And Adam, who was our last CS caller, I'm sorry, we're not going to talk to you tonight. Try again next week. And so thank you, Phil, for being my co-host today. Nice to see you again.
Yeah, it's been a while, I guess.
And
it's been a minute since the last time. Yeah.
Okay, so
But all right.
We'll see you all at Star of India. Thank you, audience, for being awesome.
All that good stuff.
And
all right.
see you next week on the Atheist Experience.